Horror show. Take the kids and not tell me and keep them all overnight, somewhere else, and I wouldn't know where they were. Like, just
Right.
torture.
Let's say you were to meet yourself as a client, and you wouldn't know the exact extent of the person's home experience, but you know that it's toxic enough that they need to leave. How would you instruct yourself to even converse with someone who's that abusive and, I would say, borderline insane? Like, how do you broach the topic to eventually be able to leave? Let's forget that there's children involved, because I know that complicates it much further.
You don't talk to them. Any engagement is an opportunity for them to abuse you. So you have to completely separate emotionally. And it takes a lot of work. It's hard, especially when you're living in the house together, especially when you're co-parenting children. And you don't want to make the children's lives weird and miserable, right? You want to pretend like everything's okay so that they don't have to suffer any more than they have to. But any engagement, and you can't have a discussion. There is no such thing as a discussion with somebody like that. It escalates immediately into a knockdown, drag-out argument where it becomes word salad. You know what that phrase means, word salad, where they're throwing in all these things, something that happened 5 years ago, something that and you're trying to understand how that's progressing their argument, but it's not. It's just keeping it going. It's just like more stuff, but you never get from point A to point B. So you go crazy trying to make the connection until finally you go, okay, this is nonsense. I'm walking away. And they go, see, I won. You agree I'm right because you quit. And you're like, okay, whatever. It makes you insane living with a person like this.
Yes.
So you have to not engage in, I call it the Stepford wife for my women clients, Stepford wife syndrome. Like, you have to become like, you're just pleasant. You just like are empty inside. You don't let any of the abuse in. You pretend like you don't even understand that it's abuse. You're like, it doesn't even affect you, but you're getting all your ducks in a row and you're preparing to leave.
Right. So one day you could just, they're gone for a work trip for 2 days. You can pack up all the things you need and go to someone's house or a shelter.
It depends. It depends on what the details of the family are, but yeah, or they serve them, or God forbid, I get them prepared. So if there is physical violence, which I'm telling you, almost always escalates to that, because when they're not getting the supply they want from you, from the verbal abuse and from the emotional abuse, when you shut down and it's not giving them what they want, the abuse has to escalate, and a lot of times it escalates into hitting, pushing, shoving, something, and I prepare them so that when that happens, they call the police.
Right. Yeah, well, and if possible, it sounds like the best case scenario is that, like you said, you can serve them, or you can leave and move out as much of your stuff as you can and get to another place that you can make better decisions from.
Right.
Hopefully a family member's place or someone that you can trust to not egg you to interact with that person any longer.
Right. But when they're kids, it becomes more complicated because you can't, if they're there, you can't take the kids because then that's kidnapping.
Right. Wow, that does make things a lot more complicated, having kids. Because I imagine when the process would start of separation or divorce, then it gives the abuser in the relationship the ability to use the children as leverage in one way or
pawns
or another, right? Which is worse for everybody, but especially the kids.
Yes, it's a whole other topic, the parental alienation piece that they perpetrate.
Right.
So that's another episode. Anyway, people always say, what would you do differently? It's like, oh, if I knew then what I know now, if I had all of this knowledge and strength that I didn't have before, I would have just made the decision that was it, and I would have filed for divorce, and I would have never had another conversation again.
Right. Which is difficult if you have kids, I would imagine. Like you have to have some sort of like, okay, well, you pick them up at this time, you pick it up at another time. Like, oh man, it's so frustrating because I really have a lot of empathy for men and women that are in that situation, because it must feel so lonely. Like with women, and I honestly am just, you know, theorizing here, but like a lot of women, there are places that women can go to speak to, or groups, etc. But I imagine when it happens to a man, that like to tell someone that your wife is abusing you, there's this whole stigma of masculinity that like if you are vulnerable or weak for half a second, then that means you're less than a man, you're not man enough, and then it becomes this internal shameful self-flagellation that they will probably continue to be abused or in this reality distortion field. And so like no one is safe in these sort of relationships when, like you said, there's no reasoning with them, there's no hoping things would get better. The answer, if someone can finally show you that the reality